Hello, thank you for joining me once again. Today I am reading The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. This is chapter 22, The Death Experience. This is the last chapter of the first part of the book. So without further ado, I'm going to continue the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis. And this starts off with text from scrolls in Atlantis. Okay, so the death experience. As fallen fruit yields the seeds of new life, the self must yield to the universal spirit. One must experience death to be reborn. Death and birth are but cycles of one continuous life. If you take all of my possessions, my body, my mind, my loved ones, then what would I have left? My true self, the one, the all. And what would you have? Nothing. Nothing can harm me. I live in my center, surrounded by my life. I die, I live, through the ages above all strife. Feel, do not fear. Be wary, do not fear. Fear attracts what you fear. Fear invites injury and attack. Fear avoids right action. Fear lives in the dark. Nothing can hurt the true self. Being the wise man or the fool, fighting dragons or surrendering to roaches, matters not. To the fearless one who has faced death and lives in the service of God, walk with death by your side. Behold the wonders, and new life will be yours. One day, I had the first of what would be many extraordinary meditations. It was a deeper and more profound meditation than I had ever had. While my eyes were closed, I began seeing a circular aura of dim light with a dark hole in the center. It looked sort of like a glowing purple donut-shaped cloud surrounded by a dark void. In the days after that first time, I would occasionally start seeing it again. Sometimes the light would do different things. It would come and go altogether, or might get brighter for a while, vibrate, and sometimes I would see it get closer to it and further away from it. It felt good. It felt great. And I'd heard about seeing a light during meditation, but I wasn't sure if this met the descriptions or was really the light I had been hearing about. So I went and found Zain to ask him about it. He was picking fruit at the time in one of the domes. I described it to him and then asked, "Is this the light I keep hearing about?" Depends. Seeing the light can be figurative for enlightenment or realization. But as you grow, new senses activate also. It is one of the lights you may experience. By your description of it, you are seeing your upper chakra and one of the passageways out of your body. Everyone perceives this a little differently, and some never see it at all. It feels so good when I see it. That's because you are growing. You are getting closer to experiencing the universal spirit directly. You are getting a taste, a glimpse of what will soon be much more. Why am I just getting a glimpse? Because you are not letting go all the way yet. One can obtain glimpses of universal consciousness in several ways, including meditation. But these are temporary visions of what you can achieve. They are good to have because it gives you a taste of the wonders that await you and can thus motivate you on your path. But you cannot attain permanent universal consciousness without having a conscious death experience. You cannot be fully unselfishly loving if you have not had a death experience. Oddly enough, you cannot really live until you've died. Before we go on, let's make something very clear. I'm not talking about real physical death here, just the essence or experience of it. More like the near-death experiences you hear about in the news, where someone gets a severe injury and temporarily die, and what they experience prior to coming back changes their life forever. But a spiritual death brought on by meditation and spiritual techniques is even more profound and accomplished without having to physically get near death to experience it. When you physically die, you always have a death experience, but you don't always need to physically die to have a death experience. A death experience may or may not be accompanied by physical death, as in the near-death experiences discussed above. But for our purposes in this chapter, we are just talking about the experience of death, not physical death. Experience for my own personal experience, which I will tell you about later. Continuing with Zain's answer to me, once one consciously experiences death, it totally changes their life forever for several reasons. For one, the selfish separate self dies, and this breaks the hold it has on us. The inner self, the part of you that is the universal spirit, can never end, never die, never be hurt, never be destroyed. Thus, the inner being takes its proper place on the throne of our life, and the separate self stops struggling for control. So the separate self is forever dead and gone within us, and we no longer have selfishness because, basically, but not quite. The separate self's death is really only temporary experience. And only the self-separate consciousness experiences this death. But to the separate self, the experience seems total, eternal, and final. And in fact, it is the final demise of the strange independent life that took control of us, became a self-monster, and had us believing that we were really it. So it comes back on you to torment you again. That was put in a question, sorry. So it comes back on you to torment you again. While separate self-consciousness only dies temporarily during a conscious death experience, it dies long enough for you to fully experience oneness with the universal spirit and attain universal consciousness. When you come out the other side of the death experience, the separate self, is reset, replaced, reborn, but under the influence of the universal spirit in the service of universal will. Author's note: it's kind of like unplugging a digital clock. The memory, the time that was set ceases to exist, but the clock still exists. When you plug it back in, you can now set a new time. Think of it like one of those robot things that are on TV and movies throughout the world these days. One that has been running on a rampage of its own selfish survival programming. If they manage to unplug it, it dies, but then you can reprogram it when you fix it. So when you plug it back in, it comes back to life to do your bidding instead of its own. You have been living with such a robot your whole life, your separate self. So you see, the separate self actually remains, but once it dies, it ceases to exist as the king or queen or commanding general of your life that it was, and it takes its proper place as the instrument of the servant of universal spirit. I can accelerate or cultivate this experience so it happens sooner. Can I accelerate or cultivate this experience so it happens sooner? I want to get on with it as fast as possible. You have been cultivating it daily with your meditations, with facing your ego, and with disciplining yourself to transcend your selfishness. But the biggest thing that is hampering you now is your fear of death. I'm not afraid to die. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Then we have nothing to discuss. I'm sorry. I should say, I don't think I'm afraid. I don't feel like I'm afraid. Let's see. If you really want to accelerate it, you can begin to bring it on faster. Your vision in your meditations is a doorway. When you see that hole in the center of light, move towards it, move into it. Eventually, you will enter a void and then see another light, a greater light than you can imagine. Move towards that. Go into it. Then we will talk more. I started working on this immediately, but the harder I tried, the more the violet light donut retreated from me. Eventually, I learned I could not make it come. I could only get to it by allowing it to. It was passive control, not active, that this thing responded to. Finally, one day I did it. I entered the hole. All of a sudden, I was thrust beyond my control, through it, and into nothingness. I felt like I was nothing. I panicked, and I was swept back to where I began, back into my body with a jolt. I now realized I was afraid. I found Zayn again and told him my story. He didn't have to say, "I told you so." We just both knew. And I knew that I'd learned one more thing, a lesson in humility and respect. Don't fear the reaper. You just began to experience death. It is yourself only who is afraid. It is your spirit that urges you on and loves the feeling. While everyone fears death, this fear is unfounded. This fear of death is created and fostered by the separate self as means of keeping its control and its selfish, separate life. But you must go through it eventually. If you don't do it now, you will experience it anyway. Because it is your destiny. As a previous adept of our order, especially in your case, being one of the old ones, the ancient initiates, it may be even more intense. But you must experience, because it will be the thing that finally changes you in many and very real ways. How will it change me? One of the things about the conscious death experience that permanently changes us is when we realize that our true consciousness, what we really are, doesn't end with death. When we thusly experience that our true consciousness not only remains, but also has eternal life, we lose the terrible fear of death from that moment on. During the death experience, our true self also bathes in the light of oneness of the universal spirit. From then on, we know what really awaits us when we die. Then we have the attitude of, so why be afraid of it? That stays with us. We know we don't need it. We know we don't need it be anymore. And if you have positively changed your life and become unselfishly loving, the plane of light and love that awaits is beautiful beyond description, beyond words. And if not, as the teachings point out, the death experience also leaves you knowing that nothing can hurt you anymore, and you become fearless. Perhaps more likely, smarter things that will make your life even safer, but more importantly, more worthwhile. And take the monkeys off of your back that you didn't even realize you were living with every moment until now. It's hard for one who has not experienced death to imagine how much of a hold fear of death has on us, and how much it affects the way we live our lives. It affects all our feelings, all our decisions, all our actions. It's there with us all the time. Once free from fear, life is lived with great feeling, great zest, great lightness, and great freedom. When you are free from fear, actions are no longer controlled by what we are afraid of. They are controlled by the real you and based on what is right. But shouldn't we be afraid of certain things, or we will be open to or even cause bad things to happen to us and be harmed? Fear can and does have a purpose, but only in its proper place. Only when it is not really fear anymore. It should become a warning mechanism only. For instance, when you are driving a vehicle and you see that you see the gauge that says your engine is boiling over. Do you scream in pain because the hot water coming out of the engine, or take action to remedy it? If we say that our life is like a car on a highway and you see a truck crossing the line ahead of you and veering towards you, you can take calm, logical, sensible action to avoid an accident if you aren't in the grip of fear. However, if you are in the grip of fear, your action will be from panic. And you are far more likely to do something stupid that will actually cause an accident. Fear attracts what it fears. If you put a 6 foot wide plank down on the ground and asked people to walk across it, they would do it every time without falling. But put that same plank, I think that's supposed to be 6-inch. But if you put that same plank across a small pond of water with air bubbles, and then tell people that the pool is filled with boiling water, then their fear will actually cause them to lose their balance some of the time. So, to the contrary of your question and fears about not having fear, the truth is quite the opposite. Fear can bring you harm and initiated not the enlightened beings who is one with the universal spirit. I'm still afraid of doing it. No, you're not. Yes, I am. Haven't we had this conversation before? Well, sort of. Why be afraid of death, Peniel? It will happen anyway. Along with transcending our fear of death and realizing that death is but a doorway, comes the realization that your present lifetime, your present body will die. It will end. And this awareness stays with you every moment you live. Once you experience it, you don't fear it anymore. You don't fear it anymore. Mind you, you are just constantly aware of it. I know I'm going to die someday. Sure, everyone says they know they're going to die, but no one really thinks they will. They do quite the contrary. They constantly block it out. When you really get that you are going to die, it changes you. This gives you a feeling of cherishing every moment, every flower, every person. And it doesn't go away like it would if you just had a near car accident or such. It permanently changes you. You no longer take anything or anyone for granted. Each moment is new and full, and you walk with death at your side, touching your shoulder, constantly reminding you to live life to the fullest, appreciate it to the fullest, and live the righteous life of a servant to the universal spirit. The creation of the death experience. If I avoid this, you say, I will still have it via destiny? Does this happen to all students? Each is different. Some who aren't destined do avoid it. How do others have a death experience? In fact, how will it be if I don't voluntarily do this in my meditation now? How does one have a death experience? Well, with some people like you, like I said, it is unavoidable. It happens to them. Situations bring it about. Sometimes the conscious death experience happens in tandem with physical death experience. Those who have had near-death experiences that weren't under the influence of drugs, anesthetics, etc., are lucky indeed. But generally, the conscious death experience is the end result of long efforts at spiritual growth. Meditation, self-discipline, working with a true teacher, ego busting, all but pressure on the separate self and corners it. The pain of all that, along with losing attachments, of seeing the darkness in the world, all build up, and at some point, you just can't take it anymore. It has been called the dark night of the soul. This is the point when a person will either flip out or flip in, according to their free will choice. The self will tell you to run at any cost. Run. It will urge you to get away from the source of the pressure. If you do so at such an advanced stage, you can go insane. But if you hang on, if you endure the suffering with patience, understanding, and love, you will have a conscious death experience and break through to the other side. When I experienced this, it was like I was totally engulfed in darkness and depression, and all there was other than that was this thin light thread of my personal teacher's love for me. I hung on to that thread with all the strength I could muster. I just blindly held on. And soon I faced my dweller and passed on to a new consciousness. This must happen to you because you died enlightenment time after time. And you chose to come back and do it again. It was your choice. Ancient history. What have I done about it before? Different things, but long ago, it was more ritualized than in these days. As a student that was close to having the death experience, was given a push, thrown into the deep water, so to speak. For instance, during the days of our times in Atlantis, this was done, and during our work in Egypt, the Great Pyramid was used for such initiation. The student would be given an elixir, a stimulant that stimulated the imagination. Then they would begin to be treated as if they had actually died. They were placed in a sarcophagus. A death ceremony was performed. Rites of death were gone through, and the sarcophagus was taken to what is now called the king's chamber in the pyramid. There, the combination of the students' training, the elixir, the death rituals that were being done to the student, the energy of the pyramid, and the hierarchical guides that would come would all combine and precipitate the death experience. The student would transcend their dweller and be met by their hierarchical guides, who would share their journey of initiation into universal consciousness. The next day, the student that walked in was no more, and the initiate walked out. But this doesn't happen anymore. The hierarchical guides still come when it is your time, but it is just left to the flow to determine the means and time. And the dweller, you have told me of this before, and I have seen it in my meditations. Quite a bit to look forward to. There really is, Peniel. In a wonderful and positive sense, just let go and transcend your fear. Can you tell me more of the dweller, since it appears we are about to have a date and a meaningful relationship? The dweller on the threshold. The dweller on the threshold is several things. In biblical allegory, it is the angel that was placed at the gates of the Eden to keep Adam and Eve from returning. It is the most horrible demon you could possibly imagine. It is nothing but your own separate self. Before you can have a conscious death experience, you must first really see the thing that you have created that is about to die. It is a terrible, selfish monster, and if you fear it, you will recoil. If you give it life, you will not be able to pass. Only by feeling unselfish love, even when confronted by this monster, will you be able to pass. And what awaits me when I pass? Beyond the threshold. Once you pass your dweller, you will enter a void, a place of nothingness and darkness. Somewhere in that void, you will find a light. Always look towards the center of the light and use your will to move towards it and into it. Do not get distracted by anything that may happen around you. Even if phantoms grab at you, just concentrate on the light. When you move into the light, then you are engulfed in the light. You will be free. Be one with the universal light. Universal spirit. At this point, you will be given a choice to stay on the earth plane and help others, or to go on and remain in paradise. The choice is yours, and there is no blame to going on. That is the final bottom line. I never did voluntarily go through my death experience in meditation. Actually, before I even really got a chance, I became very ill. I developed a serious infection, and I began a 30-day fast on juices and herbs. At the end of that time, I was still very ill, and Zayn recommended a water fast. I fasted for 40 days on water. During the last 5 days, I had 3 death experiences, both physical and spiritual. During the final one, I met my guides, and I was given a tour of all things on the earth, all life, the entire universe. I then, under their guidance, totally reprogrammed my brain. I had 5 days of visions of the future. Then I began my journey as an initiated monk. And each moment has been a miracle of life ever since. Things to do today before I physically die. Until you have a death experience, there is a special death awareness technique you can develop that can have a profoundly beneficial effect on your life, even before you have a death experience. Excuse me. Everyone should constantly be reminding themselves that they could physically die at any time. Remember, you are in fact going to die someday. One of these days you will be just a few minutes from death. Seriously, think about it. Contemplate that for a while. And in thinking about it, think about how you are leaving things and how you are using your life right now. Here are some examples. Number 1, if you are going to die in 5 minutes, is this the way you have left things with the people in your life? How you want to leave them? Number 2, are the last things you said what you want to have left said? Number 3, have you left anything unsaid that you would have wanted to say before you've gone for good? Number 4, within the perspective of knowing that you are going to die at any minute, how important to you is that issue of blank that really irritated you about living with so-and-so, or what so-and-so does, or the things you don't like about how or where you must live, etc., etc., etc. Number 5, is the terrible argument you had about such and such really important? Number 6, have you done exactly what you wanted to or needed to do with your life? Number 7, what is the legacy you are leaving? Are your last actions the actions you would want to be your last? Walking with death by your side. Here's a method you can use to remind yourself of death. Personalize it and keep it with you. Live your life consciously aware that death is always standing by your side, always an arm's length away. Then you will live accordingly. You won't live in fear. Quite the opposite. It frees you to live life fully. I highly recommend everyone contemplate their death. And it shouldn't just be something you remind yourself of daily. It should be constant, or at least as frequent as you can make it. It really helps keep things in perspective and changes the way you live. When you are always aware you might die any second, you might be dead any second, you really live. Awareness of death begets real life. Okay, that was some pretty intense and powerful information, wouldn't you say? I would. That was the end of chapter 22 in the reading of The Children of the Law of One and the Lost Teachings of Atlantis by John Peniel. You can get this book on Amazon, which I did. Read it, reread it. Listen to these videos again and again and again. Whichever part is necessary for you in your spiritual growth, in your walk in life, whatever it may be. Everybody is on their own individual path, yet we are all together living our lives. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you. Please subscribe, like, and share. Please comment down below. Start a conversation, okay? And let's enlighten together, because in these times, you cannot argue that that is what this world needs. Let's continue as a collective to move to a higher vibration for us all, enlightening for us all. We are connected consciously. We are as one. We are individual fragmented pieces of the one, individual fragmented pieces of each other. So together, the more that raise their vibration and become more enlightened, thus does the collective, thus does us all. So happy enlightening, everybody.